Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to guest host another Education is Possible for the second time. I have the great privilege of being in conversation with Ndindi Kitonga, and I look forward to the conversation. Um, this is going to sound excessively formal. Ndindi Kitonga, PhD. I don't know if that PhD is part of your name. I know it's not part of
No.
is a Kenyan educator, longtime community organizer, and houseless rights advocate. She is a co-founder of the Angelus Workshop School, a radical secondary school in LA with a focus on democratic learning and class consciousness. In addition to her work in K-12 education, Ndindi teaches ethnic studies courses for the California State University system and is a published author and scholar in the area of Black abolitionisms, socialist humanism, critical pedagogy, and anti-colonial education. In response to the horrific disparities the COVID pandemic exacerbated in her community and others, she created a small mutual aid network in her local community in March 2020, which has since grown significantly. The unhoused population in this community is comprised mostly of Black and Latin people, many of who are queer, disabled, undocumented, and people who use drugs. The abolitionist network of care, Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid, PUMA, has grown over the past 5 years from a small collective where organizers share food, hygiene, harm reduction, and other supplies with their unhoused neighbors to one where they're organizing popular education clinics, coalition building, and political mobilization. And I'll briefly say that the way I came into contact with Ndindi many moons ago was when I started my own doctoral research, and I was interested in radical traditions in education and models which place democracy, voice, and solidarity at the center of organizational practices, and looking to do so in contexts which were far less shaped and influenced by the forces of capitalism and neoliberalism and other ideologies. So it's great to be in conversation with Ndindi, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, wonderful. So I want to begin with your personal story and how your early experiences in Kenya shaped your thinking about education broadly and anti-colonialism and liberation more specifically.
Yeah, thank you. I guess that's a good place to start. I was born and I did grow up in Kenya. I moved to the US as a young adult. I was 18, came to college. The education in Kenya, the one I grew up with, it's a colonial holdover. It's kind of a British aligned program, and it's rigid. It's sink or swim type of a thing. And really, the I like to say it's designed to figure out where you're going to fit in the colonial structure after you finish, if you do, if you survive it, if you make it out. And so at the time in Kenya, we didn't not have a free education system, meaning anything from K to 12, if you could go, even when there were public schools, people have to pay school fees. Um, so that was another component of it that beyond kind of the ethnic minorities, things like location where you are. I grew up in a huge city. I grew up in Nairobi. Had I grown up in rural Kenya, my life might have looked different. So there's a lot of class distinctions. Education is supposed to be the mode through which people escape poverty and can do more for themselves and their families. That's really what it's supposed to be. Um, this is also post-independence. Kenya gets independent in 1963. So my own parents really didn't grow up in, you know, the Republic of Kenya as we know it. They grew up under a different system. So um, part of what was anti-colonial praxis was like everyone can get in, everyone can get an education. We can thrive. We are generally Pan-Africanists. I did not realize that that was a far left ideology or something. As far as I understood, every Black person was a Pan-Africanist. And no one should be poor. To me, that is just a very basic sentiment. I need to say this. I grew up in an evangelical household. There's my parents are intellectuals. They think a lot. They talk. There was nothing about the evangelicalism, as much as I critique it, particularly the Christian nationalist flavor of it. We didn't have disdain for poor people. We didn't have disdain for people with disabilities. We were not conservative, social conservatives. So that was interesting, shocking, and strange to me. Also, um, the ills of neoliberalism started to show themselves. Probably not in the kind of degradation we see themselves, but when I was a teen in the 90s, a couple of things happened. Um, US empire decided to participate in all sorts of things in my part of the world. Um, I witnessed this whole kind of genocide of the Rwandese people very much in front of our faces, and it didn't seem like anyone really cared until they did. And at that point, I had classmates who were Rwandese refugees. By the time I graduated from high school, um, I had community, had known, and had spent a lot of time with refugees from Rwanda, Somalia, Ethiopia, Uganda. I don't have time to get into all the reasons why. But it did occur to me that such a strange thing that you can easily make refugees out of people. And that also now in those refugee camps in Kenya, that you can be a third and fourth generation refugee. I found that to be an odd thing because refugee suggests to me that you get to go back
Right.
to your home. And that the US, the UN, and all of these, the UK, all of these other countries were always involved. They were always present. They were more important. You get better services being a white person in Kenya at a restaurant than being an indigenous Kenyan. So all of those things were clear to me around the questions of white supremacy, colonialism, and our curriculum for what it was. We learned a lot about the Mau Mau. We learned a lot about our own revolutionary history. And our schools also did something interesting that they wanted people to still be connected as part of this, I guess, global Pan-Africanist feeling that we had, make sure that people felt connected to themselves. So we learned all of the traditional songs. Like that was important too. And I say that because I do think there are many Black diasporic people in the world who are very disconnected from their ancestors and from those expressions. So I'm extremely grateful for those experiences because those have made a difference in a world that might tell you that you don't belong at all. Like, where my people are, they have just not moved in thousands of years. It's extremely stabilizing. And I do have the privilege of not have been a product of enslavement or refugee, um, or any of those types of things that we see happen to Indigenous and Black people everywhere in the world.
Hmm. So when you immigrated to the US, and of course, I heard you say you were undocumented for how long when you first immigrated to the US?
Till I got my PhD, 8, 10 years in there because I came on a student visa. And then 9/11, I graduated early, and then 9/11 happened. And the way before you could get, there were easier mechanisms to do what you needed to do. So a whole lot of us just became illegal because we couldn't sort it out. Um, so that's what happened. Like I actually became undocumented in most of the ways that people do in the US. People are not, yes, absolutely, people are swimming and taking boats and all of these horrible and awful things. But a good amount of us are just
By default, by
dealing.
just banal bureaucratic procedures,
Yeah.
right?
So capturing people in the street because of paperwork makes no sense.
So it must have been quite shocking, given the context you just shared, growing up in Kenya, being exposed early on to Black radical politics, not as some sort of ideology that you learn elsewhere, but as a function of your lived existence. to the US, what was it like going from one context to another? And to what degree were you able to carry your commitment forward or find challenges that prevented you from understanding why these issues didn't resonate here in the same way they did growing up for you?
Yeah, I found US society to be depoliticized. I mean, even 18-year-old me, I thought people don't really talk about real things in this place. And I mean this as somebody, there's not a marketplace
Mm.
from the shoe cobbler to the person selling the tomatoes to the kids to the elders sitting around a radio or a TV talking about political issues, clubs, songs on the radio. There's the cookouts and the things that this just seemed like a normal part of your life is that you just talk about what is happening in your life. And so it surprised me that I knew all about all the wars that the US was waging elsewhere. And I was sitting there with people who had grown up here who had no sense of what that was. I found it disappointing. I found it shameful. I dare say it was my community, like all, I guess, immigrant groups. You know, we have Kenyans and East African groups and all of these types of things um, that's supported with like things like mutual aid and like let's help each other or let's do, I found that stabilizing and helpful. Um, I also began teaching. I started teaching in 2001, the first week of September. And then it got weird the second week of September. So I've been around since that moment and how we've decided to think and talk about like Muslim Americans, brown people in general, the degradation of like Black people. I think somewhere in my mind I was like, there's just more advancement here or less dehumanization for certain groups of people. I found that not to be the case. I also found it not to be the case because I became a teacher. Like you cannot look away. I became a teacher in Los Angeles. Maybe there are other fields where I might be insulated from the social inequalities. Also, you work with kids, so surely you can't blame the kids for the poverty. You can't blame the kids for the street light. You can't blame the kids for the structural violence. You have to look for another answer for as to how and why this is happening. So I think teaching propelled and politicized me even more fighting for students. One of the actions I was first involved in was 2006. I was undocumented. I faced some consequences, but my students faced even more consequences. And this was a day without a Mexican. It was May Day.
Mm.
So first of all, I didn't understand that this was not a national holiday because everywhere else in the world, May Day is a day off. It's Labor Day. And it was a student walkout. There were heavy penalties. The school I was in at the time, South LA, predominantly brown and Black folks. And that's who walked out. And it was a charter school and there was heavy discipline for their, actions as undocumented people. It's also there where I met young people, at least where I grew up. College was an aspiration, higher education was an aspiration. And we told each other, I did have middle class advantages, but I also grew up with a family that worked with very poor folks. The aspirational capital was very high. We believed, the teachers believed, whatever it is, we believe. On a pretty regular basis, I met, and the one person I can think of, her name is Anais. She must be like 35 now. Great student. And she was like, well, I'm never going to do anything with this. I'm undocumented. I wish she had some grief around it. I wish she was angry. She was just in acceptance mode. She was just like, this is what it is. And it bothered me tremendously that I had classrooms, chemistry, 50 students 5 times a day. I've seen 300 young people all the time.
So,
And yeah,
so you came to the US and originally you were considering studying biochemistry, correct?
I did actually get my degree in biochem and then became a science teacher. Yeah.
So just going into that subject specifically,
Yeah.
because of course I'm familiar with spending time doing fieldwork at Angelus and you teaching, non-Western approaches to science education to your students
Yeah.
without friction. So when you were teaching science and you were trying to abide by whatever curricular mandate existed, how did you square your understanding of science with the expectations your school had of science education?
Yeah. I mean, I quickly realized that the curriculum, I mean, they didn't even have enough books or chairs for everyone who was there to start off with. So I didn't think that this was a serious attempt to educate people. And then I slowly started to just follow student lead. I maybe not so intuitively, I started to read. The reason I went back to get a master's in education is got recruited into this job because of science teacher shortages. It's not unusual. Tons of Kenyans, Filipinos come from the global South, English speaking nation, science degree. They'll get you in and then credential you later, or figure out how to help you become a better teacher later. But I jumped into that because it occurred to me that there's such a great disconnect. And then I just started to experiment. We started to do more like, sure, I got to go on and on about chloroplasts, but let's just garden. So we just we started to do a little bit of that. And I just started, at the time, the conversations were constructivist teaching. I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't seem anti-colonial or anti-racist necessarily, but let's go. So that's what I really did in my early 20s is experiment a lot. Lots of gardening, lots of food science, lots of what do you eat at home? Okay, as opposed to having these out here conversations and then saying you too can become a doctor one day. It didn't even seem to be that important or yeah. It seemed like show up, feel good, you can achieve in this class. Of course, it was pretty traditional, but that's kind of what we did for a little while.
So interesting. Um, so just going back to your personal story
Yeah.
and how it shaped your commitments as an educator, but also your work as an activist, I'm interested in the roots and commitments that you feel anchor your solidarity work. Um, whether it's, you know, um, your work in collaboration with, Marxist humanist organizations and advocacy groups. Of course, there's the mutual aid work you do on behalf of the unhoused, um, and so many other actions that you take. What undergirds your solidarity work, and why is it so important to you?
Thank you. Oh, this is a hard one. I think I think I took the lessons that I learned as a child and as a youth seriously, and then I became an adult, and then I became why the adults don't take these things that we talked about seriously. Which is to say, I understood the colonial situation where I came from. There was always a kind of black liberatory um, politics there, and at least the Pan-Africanism and the black politics that I understood that we all was part of it was that things can change. You can change. I can change. Transformation is the way forward and the way out because what we have here is unacceptable to us. And that if Black people were free, as we all say, everyone else would be free, not because we're special, but many of the contradictions and the types of structural violence that we see and the way anti-Blackness, at least the past, and colonialism, the past kind of 500 years of what we're experiencing, I think a lot of the contradictions and the issues can be found within this thing that we're calling a black struggle, or indigenous struggle. So to me, just to be specific, because I share history with many Black and important and useful scholars and movements and what have you, but we don't all share the same tradition. So I would say, like, Mayor Karen Bass and I, we're not pulling from the same groups of people. I'm a little bit more interested in like a Emil Cabral and those movements than I am in like, well, let's just get more of us Black people in office and keep doing the same. Um, so I guess the transformational piece is also really interesting and important to me, which I think is a little bit different than sometimes when I meet like white leftists or people who approach this from an academic perspective only, is we're very serious about being free because the conditions are actually not great and they're oppressive. And a lot of the mechanisms around what people do to get free have to do with education, but also cultural expression, um, skin, hair, nails, music, all of it, right? And so when I think of being free, it's just not the domination of capital. It's all the forms of domination, but also have very serious cultural components that have, that are not all of these kind of academic concepts. I know we're going to get to alienation, but I think part of what we think about alienation is deep alienation from self. Fanon talks quite a lot about this, and the psychoaffective, the psychological aspects of oppression really can't be ignored, right? Because like poverty is, of course, the material stuff, but poverty is like how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your people, what you can or cannot do, how to do and how to express yourself. So it seems to me that disalienation must happen on every level, from the intrapersonal, interpersonal, institutional, ideological um, level, and that education in particular, maybe if I were an economist, I'd come up with different ideas, but kids want to care about what they learn. They want to care about themselves. And there's no amount of me pontificating about Capital Volume 3 that changes the sense that poverty or racism feel bad to people. And so that we do need to kind of, right, decolonize yourself. I kind of hate where that language has gone with the in a neoliberal perspective, but I understand decolonization to be the like a complete
Because
process from the inside
everyone is
out, and that it must be
decolonized.
possible.
Yeah, no, I was saying that,
Yes.
the use of decolonizing as this kind of floating signifier or this pervasive metaphor where everything is being decolonized, whether it's curriculum or pedagogy, especially in the context in which we live now, is doing a profound injustice to the
Yeah,
meaning of that term. So
I think so.
yeah, if you take, let's say alienation, your solidarity work, let's even take like anti-colonial
Yeah,
education. And then you take these terms and you
yeah.
apply them in the context of the school you and Scott Stubb, your partner, develop. Um, how do these
Yeah.
concepts show up when you're working with youth? How do you help them develop an understanding of those concepts? And what does an unalienated education look like? If one of the definitions or understandings of alienation, and I'm not doing justice to it because it's such a rich term, workers are removed from the products of their labor. There's kind of a fragmentation between the subjective and the objective world, and they lose the capacity to appropriate their creative life, and they live in a kind of a divided
Yeah.
context. At Angeles, clearly, there's a way in which students have genuine ownership where the social relations aren't fully reified, they're dynamic. But already I'm getting into it a little bit because I'm just interested for practitioners how your experience in a high school setting developing Angelus helps you see these concepts that shape your activist work, are part of your lived experience, but now you're taking them up as pedagogical practices. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Yes. Yeah, this is a good question. Kind of stopped altogether even using the word decolonial in any writing I do. I write anti-colonial and I'm like, meet me where I'm at. I can no longer figure out where everyone else is with this stuff. Angela's Workshop School is an experiment in addressing the alienation that and I say we because I think everyone is a learner, that learners have in a capitalist system and in like a Paulo Freirean way, education should be liberatory. So give you the skills, the tools, offer the relationships, allow you to critique and think about what you do so that you can figure out how to liberate yourself. Because I understand that emancipation has to come from not just within or below, but that we cannot impose it on other people. The same way we're trying to bomb some liberation into Iran right now. That isn't where that is. And so in anti-colonial education, we started small. So from you want less transactional, less reified social relations. What are things we can do that are easy to break down some of these hierarchies? Hence our community circle every morning, hence having more choice, ownership, and curriculum, and also working out the things that we don't know how to be democratic. So I like to be honest and have people push and ask questions. We have not yet figured out, we have a pay what you can model, but we haven't figured out democratic budgetary process, for instance. I'm still kind of making the decisions as to what to pay for. And, sure, I choose Wi-Fi and teachers
And I'm sure the kids that
versus, you know,
I'm sure the kids detect where it feels authoritarian, right? They're like, you call this school
I
to
think
like,
so.
at the end of the day, certain decisions are out of our hands.
Yeah, which is good, but I'm good talking about them because there are probably better ways to do any of these things that we're talking about. Um, the pedagogy as well, I really decided get out of the AP Science, SATs, like get back to what curiosity, problem posing, dialogue based, which I will say the humanities and the social sciences, for whatever it is in academia and other places, the teaching colleges, they did put more energy there. And in science, there's just the assumption of this person will go on and on and on about the mitochondria. So that I will say that made a difference because, most of my science class now are pretty dialogue based. I don't need to have kids nearly be balancing equations as much as they need. Also, the tools have changed. We're preparing students for jobs that we don't know what they are going to be. So I don't see how anyone can even make a case anymore for things like hours of homework, kill and drill. Like I see no reason to do it. And we started 12 years ago and we just got out of it. No tests, none whatsoever. Just be done with it. But instead, let's do projects. Let's write. Let's have conversation. Also, the conversation goes as long as it needs to. Sure, we have semesters, what have you. Um, I open up my classes with here are all the things I'm kind of thinking about, and we kind of need to do a life science this year because last year we did a physical science, and then we all decide. So right now we're doing a forensic science. But it's an opportunity for me to talk about carcerality, crime. Why are we obsessed with people who like, what's that about? We're talking about the psychology of crime. We're talking about what do you think the police do or don't do? We're also doing the DNA. I mean, yesterday we made fake blood and, blood spatters. We're doing all the stuff, but we're having a conversation about what do real people in the world who do this do? Also, you can't put them on a pedestal. PD has tons of rape kits, tons of evidence sitting somewhere. If it just came down to solving the crime of ordinary people, They have every tool, they have every budget, they have everything to do this. But instead of telling them, hey, we're ACAB all day, every day, it's, hmm, let's think together what it is. What do you fundamentally think the police are? And then, Scott will be in another room, his humanities. And then when these conversations come up, so then allows people to not just, I guess there's a sense whenever they call us Marxist teachers that we're out here indoctrinating people. And I'm just like, I don't know what to tell you if reality is biased in this particular way. And we're pulling from sources and movements, and we're also pulling from the real life that students see every day.
Yeah, and
And
even your
they,
background, in terms of Marxist humanism, is sort of in relation to some of the structures of Marxist orthodoxy. In other words, like um, there's a kind of a dynamism, which I know about your background, where your theoretical commitments are not discrete subjects; they're interconnected in these dynamic ways. But honing in
yeah.
on what you mentioned and what I mentioned in your intro, I said something to the effect of Ndindi is a co-founder of Angelus Workshop School, a radical secondary school with a focus on democratic learning, which may come up in a lot of contexts, but class consciousness. You rarely see a school that chooses as one of its, let's say, expected school-wide learning outcomes, whether it's private, public, class consciousness. Part of that is made possible by the tuition model and the access that you're able to provide people who are priced out or alienated and overwhelmed by, big public schools. But can you tell me about why class consciousness is one of the outcomes of the Angelus Workshop model?
That's a good question. So I don't think that the notion of democracy is limited to radical or revolutionary politics. Neoliberals believe in some form of democracy. There's bourgeois democracy. Um, but what I think politicizes democracy and makes it so that we move beyond representation, or there used to be bad laws and now there are better laws. And sure, we're not lynching the people in the streets. I don't know, if you're captured by ICE, you probably don't feel that right now. And I also find US society to be so depoliticized when it comes to class that people don't really understand that they are working class sometimes, and they don't understand the power in that. So for us, class consciousness learning is overtly political and distinguishes us from other great schools that want students to feel good and to learn and to experiment. I don't knock them. Everyone's doing what they can. But ours is an overtly political project around every single form of domination. And if capital is one of the things that's dominating people, it seems irresponsible to me to live in a world in which people don't understand what that means or how that works. Because if we don't have this kind of class consciousness conversations, I likely would not have been able to snowball as well into Puma support of unhoused people. That could have been a charitable model that we just take on versus we align our class interests with unhoused people. We rent workshop. Scott and I rent where we are, and we understand precarity. Not precarity is living on the street, and so do many of our students. So we want to have good heuristics and thoughts. And it's not just that we're not anti-racist. I think it's pretty okay to still be anti-poor or anti-working class, or to look down on people who have less. Because I think a lot of American exceptionalism is around the one or two figures who make it versus our real conversations about class. So that's really how we got there. And then we find that we make the best allies and friends with other people who have that understanding versus the people who like, we clean the beach
Right.
once in a while.
Risk
We
learning?
are climate responsible.
Right. Yeah, and it feels as if Angelus has done such a wonderful job dissolving the binary between this entity we call school and a larger community context, it doesn't feel as if there's any dividing line between your solidarity work on behalf of Puma and your work pedagogically. Similarly, when you do City as a classroom, it's not just an opportunity to do civic learning and come back and do a book report. Um, Students are investigating spatial injustice, they're mapping the city. Um, so it sounds like that is intentional, and a way of
Yeah.
also kind of problematizing the way in which school learning and knowledge is so segregated and removed from its situated context in the neighborhoods and
Mhm.
settings where students come from and where they'll return.
Yeah, we were on the strike line last Thursday for City Day. The Writers Guild of America is back on strike. I mean, that was it. That was the day you showed up. You held a picket sign. It was also, we're working with the shyness and neurodivergence and all of these things. And it's like, okay, here's a group of people. If you ever see it, this is what this means. There's Scabby the rat. What's a scab? And also the fact that they get to hear this from a handful of individuals other than the adults. But I do know holding a sign on strike is not likely an experience 12-year-olds have in their education. So it matters.
That brings us to our final question, Ndindi. The name of this podcast, as we both know, is Another Education is Possible. How do you take up the question of educational possibility? What does it mean to you as an educator, an activist, and a human being?
Um, if another education is possible, it seems to me that many more of us should be attempting projects, experiments, um, educational opportunities. I'm not saying everyone needs to run a school. It's a whole undertaking. But I do think if we are serious about this question, that we have to start now, right? It's not a after the revolution type of things. There's not going to be that perfect day of which you could have started whatever you were starting. So moving past kind of white supremacist notions of perfection, having all the ducks in a row. But what is necessary for these types of projects, if we are serious about overcoming, not even overcoming, I'll say transcending to the point where you cannot return, is my understanding of when it's over and done with. No one can ever can imagine us returning to a feudal society. I want to wake up, or at least people after me, being like, wow, I can't believe, like, we can never even imagine going back to that. For that to happen, it seems to me that what many feminists, Black feminists have said, many people who are interested in filling the gap of the theory and the doing has to happen and the theorizing have to happen at the same time. And they have to be happening now and with more seriousness. Um, the fear with which, or trepidation when we started our school, it was just before the Trump years. It was 2013, 2014. I'm so grateful because it's been 10 years of Trump. It's been 10 years of many things that have happened in a short amount of time. And I can't imagine having stayed in my traditional teaching environment, not developing and growing, not with just with Scott and other adults, but with the young people we've had. I think that has been a tremendous opportunity for all of us, because otherwise, I was in a classroom where I was trying to do the most humanizing types of things, but there is nowhere in there I could have spent the whole day talking about like criminalization and the police and also do the science class. And I do think that has made a difference to the young people who've come our way. Um, it might not be life altering on a scale. We just work with 20 kids or so. But I also encourage folks to not just think about all of these things as a scale up model, but a scale out model, where many of us, with many of our concerns, can kind of come together and collectivize towards what we want when it comes to education. And public school is an important site of struggle. And I think we should always defend it and be there for that, but never think of it as the horizon because we got a concession of free public education. We all collectively deserve better, and if no one deserves better than anything, it's the kids. So to me, when we say another education is possible, I think that's a call for courage, especially among the people in their ivory towers, especially people who have some class advantages. We're all going to need to commit class suicide here to make this thing go forward. I didn't become a traditional academic, so I'm okay. I say whatever I want to say. And I think people need to sacrifice some things for us to get these. I think there are all sorts of people in colleges in all sorts of places, skill sets, very smart, very capable. And you could be spending a little bit of your time on something else that offers this transformational piece.
Thank you so much to our guest, Ndindi Kitonga. Sorry for that slight tech issue at the end. We could have covered so many other topics, including her incredible work co-leading and designing Liberated Ethnic Studies, a model for critically engaged ethnic study curricula throughout California. And of course, if anybody happens to be in LA, Southern California, I encourage you to check out the Angelus Workshop School and her amazing work with PUMA, Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid. They do tremendous work, and they're also talking about care-based solidarity work both in California, on the East Coast, and everywhere in between. So thank you, Ndindi, and thank you, Jordan, for this platform and for the opportunity to guest host, and thank you for listening.